Hello, my name is Lydia, and I want to take the time to welcome you to my How to Study workshop. In this workshop, I will discuss study techniques and habits and how they can help you learn. Upon completion of this workshop, students will understand how learning works, understand how study techniques help you remember class material, and will know how to use various study techniques to improve their learning. In order to know what study techniques are beneficial to you, we will first discuss how learning works. Researchers say that students are a poor judge when it comes to what they know and what they do not know. As students, when the topic being learned feels difficult and it feels like we're not making much progress, we tend to be drawn to learning strategies that help us feel productive, even though the information gained from these strategies are often temporary. Learning requires memory so that we can recall the material when we need it. Research shows that the act of being exposed to new information, no matter how repetitious, will not allow you to commit it to memory. They suggest that for you to remember class material, you should be able to recall facts, concepts, and even events from memory. Many people think their intellectual abilities start at birth and that failure to meet any learning challenges is an indictment of their natural abilities. While it is true that we start life with a certain set of genes, it is also true that we become capable through learning and development of mental models, which help us reason, solve, and create. This means that what shapes our intellectual abilities lies within our own control. Understanding this means we can see failure as us putting forth effort into our learning and use it as a source for information in order to help us become better learners. Please know that some of the most successful students are those who take control of their learning and learn to follow strategies that will help them be successful. Your intellectual ability is not fixed but rests in how you think of yourself as a learner and relies on you to try your best. There are things you can do to ramp up the intelligence you already have. You need to embrace growth mindset and practice like you are an expert. The concept of growth mindset was studied by a psychologist named Carol Dweck. She ran a workshop with low-performing 7th graders. She began by teaching students about the brain and then gave students techniques they could use to study. One half of the students received a presentation on memory, while the other half of the students were given an explanation on how the brain changes when you use effort to learn. She explained to the students that when you try hard to learn something new, the brain will form new connections, and these connections will help make you smarter over time. Once the workshop finished, both groups of students went back to their classroom. By the end of the school year, those students who were taught about effortful learning adopted a growth mindset, and those students became high achievers over those students who were taught that learning is set from birth. The conclusion of this study is that we as individuals have the power to increase our abilities, but it requires us to put forth effort. Researchers have found that students are studying, but the studying they are doing is not helpful to their learning or test scores. This is because many students are using the wrong study strategies. Rereading the text is the #1 study strategy among most students. Washington University scientists conducted an experiment with another university in order to test the benefit rereading would have for students. 148 students of different reading levels participated in the study. They were asked to read 5 different passages from textbooks and Scientific America. Some students read the material once, while the others read the material twice back to back. Next, they were asked to answer questions about the reading in order to see what they learned and remembered. The study results were that multiple readings back to back did not prove to be a beneficial study method for either group of participants. Researchers concluded that it makes sense to reread the text once if there has been a significant amount of time between the first time you have read it. They suggest that because this practice is time-consuming and does not benefit the student should use another method to study. Another study strategy used often by students is cramming. Cramming, also known as massed practice, is a study technique used by students to try and absorb a large amount of information in a short amount of time. This strategy feels productive and it may help to get you through an exam the next day, but most of the material you are learning will be forgotten quickly, and you will not remember most of what has been studied by the time the final exam comes around. Researchers conducted a study on cramming. In their study, they found that 2 days after the test, students who crammed had forgotten about 50% of what they had studied. However, those students who used retrieval practices to study had only forgotten about 13% of what they had learned. Retrieval practice is a study strategy where bringing information to mind helps enhance and boost learning. An example of this strategy is quizzing or testing. Researchers urge learners to consider testing as a retrieval practice to enhance learning rather than use it to measure learning. There are benefits to using retrieval practice, such as you can see what you know and what you do not know, and gain insight into where you should focus your studying. Another benefit retrieval practice has is that it strengthens what you know and allows you to recall it easier when you need it in the future. For this reason, researchers suggest that instead of rereading a text, learners should get into the habit of quizzing themselves often. Retrieval practices may be unappealing to students because it takes time and requires effort from the student. Researchers tested retrieval practices by using a 6th grade social studies course. They tested their methods over 3 semesters, which included several chapters from the textbook. They also ensured that all teaching methods, lesson plans, and test structures stayed the way the teacher intended. The only difference between the classes was the introduction of quizzes. These quizzes were designed to cover at least 1/3 of the material covered in class, and the quizzes were used as a tool. Therefore, students were not graded. This experiment's results were eye-opening because those students who had been given the small quizzes over the course of the semester tested a grade above the material that they had been tested on versus the material they had not been quizzed on. Spaced out retrieval means you need to study the class material more than once, but you need to leave time in between study sessions. Spaced out practice is more effective than mass practice or cramming because it requires more effort from you, the learner. It requires you not to cram the information, but rather practice it over time. Researchers conducted a study with 38 surgical residents. In this study, the surgical residents were asked to take a series of microsurgery lessons. The course is comprised of teaching and practice. A portion of the residents completed all 4 classes in one day, while the other half of the residents finished the sessions spaced out with a week in between each course. A month later, the residents were given a test. Those residents who completed the lessons spaced out outperformed the other residents in all areas. 16% of the students who did all their courses in one day were unable to complete their surgeries altogether. The conclusion of the study is that anything you want to remember must be reviewed periodically from memory. Interleaved practice is a study technique where students practice multiple subjects or topics at the same time. Researchers conducted a study where college students practiced a set of geometry problems. One group did all the questions in sequential order, or mass practiced them, while the other group practiced the same questions but did them in clusters, interleaved practice. Initially, students who had practiced in sequential order outperformed those who mixed up the problems. However, on the final test, the students who mixed up their practice problems outperformed those who only practiced in sequential order. This learning strategy feels like it takes longer, and because of this, students find the process confusing. But research shows that interleaved practice rather than mass practice allows for greater understanding of the material and helps you remember the information longer. We will now discuss study techniques and how you can use them to improve your learning. In order to implement effective study strategies and improve your learning, it is important to dedicate time each week to studying. By setting aside time each week to study, this will allow you to keep track of your progress and discover what you know and what you do not know. In addition, we know that cramming is not an effective study strategy because most of what you learn using that strategy is forgotten. I suggest getting a calendar to help you keep track of the material that you are studying. Next, I suggest that when you read a textbook or class material, you need to pause often and ask yourself questions about what you read. You should do this retrieval practice in place of rereading. When reading through class materials, you should ask yourself, what are the big ideas and concepts? What ideas or concepts are new to me? Define any key terms and ask how Does what I am learning right now relate to what I already know? This retrieval practice will help you make connections as you continue to learn new concepts. You should also keep track of all of your questions in a notebook so that you are able to review them when needed. Another suggestion I have is the use of flashcards. Using flashcards is a way for you to quiz yourself and can be used in all areas of study. We know that self-quizzing can help improve our memory. When using flashcards, you will want to write the term or information on one side and the answer on the other. Then you will take turns reading through the cards. It is important to remember to not just turn the card over to get the answer, but to do your best to recall the information from memory before turning it over. Once you are confident that you understand the information on the cards, put them away for a little while and schedule a time to review them later. Many textbooks have a quiz at the end of the chapter. It is my suggestion that you practice taking the quizzes at the end of each chapter and complete any exercise that asks you to practice the material. This will allow you to know what material you need to review and give you a good sense of what you know and what you do not know. We discussed earlier in the workshop that it is important for students to take control of their learning and apply effort when learning. Additionally, for this strategy to be helpful to you, please remember to set aside time each week to quiz yourself over the current material that you are discussing and over the material that has been covered in the weeks prior. Thank you for joining me today for my workshop. I hope that this workshop has been helpful to you as a student and that you can take the strategies that we discussed today and implement them in your academics.